On the morning of July 12th, 2020, a fire was called away aboard the USS Bonhomme Richard while the ship was pierside in San Diego for a maintenance availability. 5 days later, when the last of the flames were extinguished, the ship had suffered catastrophic damage. The Bonhomme Richard was a near total loss for the Navy. What remained was eventually sold for scrap. In 2021, after a lengthy investigation, the Navy issued a report on both the cause of the fire and the difficulties faced by firefighters on scene in dealing with the casualty. Although the Navy's report determined several deficiencies, the integration between shipboard firefighters, the base's fire and emergency services, and other first responders was specifically highlighted as a problem area. In the event of a pierside fire, seamless integration between all first responders is essential, especially between ship's forces and base fire and emergency services. In this video, we will present a scenario in which a shipboard fire occurs pierside and walk through the steps and processes of integrating ship's forces, Navy fire and emergency services, and any other responding parties. A fire is called away on your ship while you are pierside. Shipboard personnel will call away the fire and begin to fight the casualty as normal. At the same time, fire and emergency services will be notified. Within minutes, your local base Navy Fire and Emergency Services will arrive on the pier. Every casualty will be unique, and Fire and Emergency Services will have to assess the situation on the pier after determining how best to continue. F&ES personnel will begin to set up their stations on the pier. These stations include a PPE area, a rehab station, a medical triage station, and a staging area. The layout of stations will shift depending on what obstacles are present and the fire department's ability to gain access. Meanwhile, a representative from F&ES will board the ship and proceed to the quarterdeck. There, they will confer with the CDO, and the CDO will declare a major fire. The CDO must declare a major fire to Navy Fire and Emergency Services in order for them to be able to provide assistance and begin the integration process. Members of the Federal Fire Department will integrate onto the quarterdeck and the Damage Control Center and act as a communication bridge between shipboard operations and pierside operations. This is primarily to ensure radio communication and accountability for all parties involved. A two-man F&ES Rapid Intervention Team, or RIT, will board the quarterdeck and immediately integrate with ship's forces where needed. Because Fire and Emergency Services firefighters are not familiar with the layout of individual ships, it is the ship's responsibility to provide escorts to designated locations. The primary command and control for fighting the fire will continue to take place on board the ship. However, accountability of personnel, recovery, and recharging will be conducted on the pier by Fire and Emergency Services for both ship's forces and base firefighters and other personnel. F&ES will use a ladder truck to run a hose onto the deck of the ship. This hose will act as a secondary water source connected to the pierside hydrant. Meanwhile, at the scene of the casualty, ship's forces continue to fight the fire. Two members of F&ES will board the ship from the pierside staging area and be integrated with two shipboard firefighters to form an integrated hose team. This host team, made up of 2 members of ship's forces and 2 F&ES firefighters, will relieve the first host team on scene when ready. Once relieved, rather than proceeding to the standard shipboard recovery area, the host team will move to the quarterdeck and down the brow to the pier. Accountability will be taken by ship's forces on the quarterdeck and F&ES on the pier. Once on the pier, the first host team will drop their PPE at the PPE drop-off area. F&ES will recharge SCBA's pier side at high speeds using an air cart. The first host team will then report to the rehab station. Here, firefighters will be given a brief medical assessment, hydration, and rest. If there are any medical issues, they will proceed to the triage area, where personnel from the base hospital will conduct further assessments. Base ambulances will stand by to bring patients to the hospital for further treatment if necessary. When the recovery period has ended, firefighters will dress back out and report to the pierside staging area. This process will continue until all of the firefighting forces are integrated. As each host team is relieved, they will proceed to the quarterdeck, be accounted for, proceed down the brow, be accounted for again, drop PPE and SCBAs at the designated PPE drop-off area, proceed to rehab, be medically assessed, and if necessary, proceed to triage, rest and monitored for 20 minutes at the rehab station, retrieve PPE and filled SCBAs, dress out, and report to the pierside staging area. As this process continues, base firefighters and shipboard firefighters will eventually become mixed together completely into one cohesive firefighting force. This is known as integration, and they will continue to follow this life cycle process until the casualty is secured. A few key things should be noted. Any additional firefighting personnel, including rescue and assistance personnel from other ships and off-base fire departments, upon arrival at the scene, will proceed directly to the pierside staging area. Here, they will be integrated into host teams along with ship's forces and F&ES personnel. Depending on the location of your base, there may be language barriers or other mitigating factors that require more steps in this process. According to the 80-10 instruction, there should be 2 hose lines in every fire space at all times. While shipboard firefighters tend to rotate between Host Team 1 and Host Team 2, base fire and emergency services and off-base fire departments will typically keep a running number of host teams in an integrated environment. It is this system of numbering that should be used: Host Team 1, Host Team 2, Host Team 3, Host Team 4, and so on. Realistically, controlling a major fire on board a ship can be a multi-day event. The typical op cycle for a firefighter in these conditions will be 12 hours. For example, firefighters fought the Bono-Machard fire for over 4 days. Because of the length of time and physical and psychological stressors involved, it is critically important that the processes outlined in this video are followed by every person fighting the fire. With that, let's take one final look at the process. Starting from the pierside staging area, firefighters will be called to fight the fire. Proceed to the command area, be accounted for. Then proceed up the brow to the quarterdeck and be accounted for again. They will then proceed to fight the fire as part of a 4-man integrated host team. Once relieved, they will return to the quarterdeck, be accounted for, proceed down the brow, and be accounted for again. They will then proceed to the PPE area and drop SCBAs and PPE. From there, they will proceed to rehab for medical assessment and on to triage if necessary. Then, rest and recover for 20 minutes at the rehab station. With rehab complete, they will retrieve filled SCBAs and PPE, dress out, and return back to the pierside staging area. This cycle will continue until the casualty is secured. Integration allows for the ship to maintain command and control of fighting the fire while having extra personnel to assist in doing it. It also removes the burden of rest, rehab, triage, recharging, and other logistical elements, effectively shifting responsibility of those elements to the base fire and emergency services. By understanding, drilling, and following this integration process, every firefighter can do their part to mitigate the kind of outcome that occurred in 2020 on the Bonhomme Richard. For further information, contact your installation's fire and emergency services or speak to your chain of command.